You ask me, oh, well, okay, sometimes you get the idea that trees were the creators of civilization. Well, it's creator of life on land. Because
Right.
remember, like the Devonian period, up to the first true tree, Archaeopteryx, was totally in the water.
Right.
With the
Right.
exception of extremely small, like insects on the land. Because you had to be able to for large animals to metabolize requires a sufficient amount of oxygen.
Interesting. That's so cool.
You know, you could say without the trees, you would have never had large terrestrial life, which evolved into us.
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Christoph, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. I've got a deep dive for you today. It's a deep dive into our history, a deep dive into the use of wood and the use of forests, overuse, I should say. And to do that, I brought on John Perlin. John Perlin is an author, a lecturer, and a consultant for solar energy and forest preservation. Now, in 1988, I believe, he wrote and released a book called A Forest Journey, The Role of Wood in the Fate of Civilization. Actually, I think the subtitle was slightly different back then, but we're going with the new one. So he's since rewritten and updated and re-released this book through Patagonia. And yeah, I got the chance to read it. It was awesome. It really was a great deep dive into the history of trees. Starts off with trees, like the first ever tree, which like not a question I ever thought to ask was, what is the first tree? So I don't know, but it was cool. And learned a lot looking for a fossil of that one now. All the way into the use of wood and inevitable almost deforestation of mass landscapes of forests, you know, throughout all of human history and pretty much every civilization and empire that's ever existed, and the resulting human devastation and basically fall of an empire because of that deforestation and loss of access to wood, and walks us through all of these eras and all of these thinkers and all of these empires and how they all made the kind of the same mistake once and again. And although I feel like today we're in a place where as a society we're starting to move towards thinking ecologically, thinking about balance, I wanted to bring him on and do a deep dive on this. And you know, how easy is it for us to mess this up again and do what everybody else did? You know, like, is that possible? Are we a long ways from that? And so we spent a lot of time talking about kind of the examples. You know, why is wood so important? I mean, really, it's the bedrock of civilization. It's what brought us heat and cooking and all kinds of other things, as you will see. Very important, metallurgy, everything else. And without it, we wouldn't be where we are today. So this book was a deep love of wood and forests and the need for wood in a society. But more importantly, I think from John's point of view and from most people's point of view, I think the need for forests, good, healthy forests. You know, we're talking about needing all of the values that a forest provides, such as clean water, mitigating global temperatures, creating rainfall, and you know, habitat, biodiversity, all these things. We need them all. And so this was such a great conversation with John. Really got to dive into it and get a different perspective for where we're sitting as a society compared to societies of the past. John is he describes himself as a lover of forests and all growing things. He's super curious and always been into science and history. And he's also a very detailed author. This book is like 500 pages long. It is long. Lots of good photos in there and images, but it's a long book. And it was really, really good, though. I really appreciated it. And it gave me a new appreciation for the importance of wood in our lives and the importance of forests. Sponsors for this episode, West Fraser is the number one. Without them, this would not be possible. So thank you, West Fraser, for your support. I really appreciate it. Wouldn't be able to do it without you. And Greenlink Forestry, also been with me since the beginning. Could not do this without them. Thank you, Greenlink. And that's it. Here we go. What was going on in your life when you first had the idea for this book? Maybe not when you first released it or while you were writing it, but where did the inspiration come, and what was happening with you that this book came to mind?
Well, first of all, the inspiration might have been in my childhood, because even though I grew up in the center of Los Angeles, I was always into growing things.
Okay.
And then when I was 11 years old, in a local newspaper, there was a contest for science kitty kids like myself. And if your question was accepted, it was syndicated for the whole country.
Oh, wow.
So if your question was printed, you got an award.
Oh, nice.
Right. And I asked the question, if a seed is so small, why is a tree so tall? And that won me the first book of trees.
That's awesome. So I had a question that I was going to ask you later. I was going to say, were you a historian first or a tree lover first? And I think we've answered that question. Right.
Well, actually, science too, because in my household we had lots of books in the house, and and one of the books was doing experiments. And, I'd be running from my room to the kitchen to do this or that experiment, because they were all like hands-on for like 11, 12-year-olds.
Right.
So I'd always be doing that stuff. And also I was always very, very curious. And then I know people don't realize this, but growing up in Los Angeles, I actually had a sled and a toboggan, because all you have to do is go up to the San Gabriel Mountains in wintertime. And there's growing lots of trees. And actually, and it was really funny, because my friend and I, both being Jewish, we actually got these big pine cones and did Christmas decorations and walked around the neighborhood, selling them, because I wanted an electric train set.
That's awesome.
You have to understand, I grew up in a neighborhood right near downtown Los Angeles, but it's like a Garden of Eden. Like,
oh, cool.
And I couldn't understand why people would, live in a house with just a little grass front yard.
Right.
Because we had like a big backyard with a big pine growing, a big pepper tree growing, and also a big cactus. And I was always like planting. I mean, I planted like about 50 or 100 like sweet pea plants in the front yard, and then fed them to my pet tortoise.
That's awesome. So surrounded by life, yeah.
We had a wild area, and this is the center of LA, of about 6,000 acres. I know this is like, you guys do hectares, right?
Acres is okay too. We understand both.
Yeah, I know. You're by lengthial.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Perfect. That's a good one.
Right. So, we had this, park just 2 blocks away where, we had lots of trees and, running around with bows and arrows, living a very country life in the center of the city.
That's awesome. That sounds it. I can just imagine it. It sounds perfect. It's very different. It sounds like your upbringing was similar to mine in that I grew up obsessed with nature and that kind of thing, but I was on the edge of the boreal forest and not downtown LA. And it's impressive that you were able to find that as a young child in those settings, and it speaks to your calling, I guess, right? It's a hell of a place to be motivated, hey? To be inspired.
Yeah. And also I've always just been very curious as both as a child and continuing as a adult.
Yeah.
But
I love that.
But now if you want to know how exactly I got into a forest journey, was I did a book on the history of solar energy, which was a breakthrough book, because when I was doing the solar history book, everybody said, "Oh, ho, ho, ho! It'll be a very thin book, right?"
Yeah,
You
right.
know, everybody thinking that solar energy was just a 20th century technology, and
Hmm.
it turned out it was a huge book, and it began with the ancient Chinese,
Mm.
and they always turned to solar for their heating when they were running out of wood.
Okay, that's wild. I didn't know
So,
that.
yeah, and also with the Romans and the Greeks, the same thing happened. They would run out of wood, and because wood was the primary material to heat with, they had to make up for that heat with the sun.
So how do they do that?
Yeah, so once I finished that book, I asked the question if wood was so important, for a fuel. It
Oh,
must have been extremely influential in all the ways that people lived. And
right.
so that's how I began the project, but I didn't realize what a huge undertaking I was doing.
Yeah.
That's another story where I taught myself, for example, um, how to say wood, pine, oak, et
Yeah.
cetera, in each language that I decided to look at, from all the way back from Sumerian,
Okay.
dating 5,000 years ago, to Linear B, which is ancient Greek, then
Wild.
Greek, then Roman, Latin. And so what the reason I did that was because there's various lexicons which for each of these cultures that point to the literature that discusses these issues, because I wanted to make the book a not like a academic piece, you might say, but
Okay.
to hear the voices of the people from each period discussing their use of wood, and they're running out of wood or colonizing another area for wood. Um,
Mm,
so the lexicon would lead to the literature, and then I would get people to translate for me the various pieces of literature talking about the various forestry issues. For
mm.
example, Plato, looking at deforested Attica, saying now that there are no more trees to protect against the erosion of rains. The soil is like a skeleton without any meat.
Mm. Right.
That's just one of many examples.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot. I want to know, what's the word for pine in ancient Sumerian? Do you remember?
I can tell you I can tell you Greek and Latin,
Sure.
and not pine, but wood. And I'm really glad you brought this up, because I
Okay.
would have never said this, is it's hule in Greek and materia in Latin. And both cases, it was used sequentially for matter and wood, showing that wood was of such importance that they considered wood to be the matter that everything came from.
Oh, I get that feeling from. It's funny that you say that, because I get the feeling from the book. I mean, it seems to me like I was trying to describe it in my mind of kind of the grander theme, right? And I had like 7 or 8 different little like one-off sentences of like, oh, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like this, and the two I'm going to go with right now. I was like, it's like the book is like a history of civilization from the perspective of wood, but also it's kind of a love story of wood and forests from a perspective of a grieving admirer.
Correct. But also a realization that, have you heard of the Ashmolean Museum?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's the best museum on antiquity. And
Okay.
so they had all these productions of antiquity, but what they lacked was, how did these artifacts get produced?
Okay.
And they all got produced because of either a wood fuel or a derivative of wood, which we call charcoal.
Right.
So what basically the book is about is that we've misunderstood the underpinning of all cultures because we use like the Metal Ages, for example, to describe, the different development, the different cultures.
Mm-hmm. The Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Steel Age,
right.
all that stuff.
But it should be the Wood Age, because the fuel, for example, with metals on Earth, only about 5% are what we call native. In other words, pure.
Gotcha.
All the other metals are embedded in rock and only make a certain percentage of that rock. So the question is, how do you get that metal out? And the only way you can get the metal out is by a high flame or high heat. And 99% of that heat was from charcoal. And so it really should be called, we maybe have a derivative, have the Stone Age called the Wood Age, and have the Metal Ages called the Charcoal Age.
Ah, there you go.
Because wood, being the primary fuel, enabled our species to survive. Because we would have stayed in Africa without wood fuel for heat. Right.
Couldn't survive the northerly climates.
Can you imagine being in Alberta in the wintertime without for example, right?
Yeah.
And even in the 1870s, I don't know about Canada, but I think it was probably the same. In 1876, the majority of Americans burnt wood fuel for heat.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's funny to me reading this book and the importance of wood when it comes to civilization building and cultural, advancement and that kind of thing, how it never struck me. I never really realized how you can really make an argument for it being the bedrock of human civilization and, the advancement of technology and, everything else. It's pretty incredible.
It was said that it would be better to have be without gold than to be without wood.
Right. And actually, before I want to get into this, I want to get into I want to get a bunch of examples of the importance of wood and the crucial necessity of it. I want to do all that. Before we get into that, because I think it was important, the way you started the book was talking about the first known modern tree, Archaeopteryx, right? And I found that to be, I don't know why, I didn't know that was the case. I never really thought of it. What was the first tree, right? So that taught me about that and sent me down this rabbit hole of okay, where can I see a fossil of, we have museums here, there. I was looking up the Royal Alberta Museum. I was like, can I see a fossil of this tree, or where can I? And I would just go down. I was down this rabbit hole of interest to find the first tree.
Could you find anything?
I couldn't find anything in Edmonton, but I think down south there's a few museums that might have something. So I'm gonna keep digging. And
if you want, I have a whole bin.
Oh, do you?
In 1999, first paper coming out from Nature magazine about this first true tree. Because what happened was, and this is what makes it very interesting, because we had at the time of the late Middle Devonian, there was just one continent, Gondwanan.
Right.
So what happened is the tree spread throughout that landmass, right? So the entire continent. So today, because Gondwanan separated due to plate tectonics, today we can find Archaeopteryx, the first true tree. We can find it in Oklahoma, fossils of it in Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, northern New York, and then in Ireland.
Just everywhere
in Belgium, and the real bevy of these fossils where they made the discovery that this was the first true tree came from Morocco, where they found 150 trunks in the 1990s. And what they did is they discovered that it had all the accoutrements that made it a true tree. In other words, it had the phloem, the xylem, it had the deep roots, it had the branches and leaves. That never happened before,
right,
on the history of the earth.
And to kind of paint a picture of it, it was sort of like a kind of cedarish, right? It's
called a proto-gymnosperm.
Okay.
It's actually the parent of all the gymnosperms.
Gotcha.
And it's really quite interesting because its foliage is fern-like.
Right, yeah.
But its trunk is perfectly aligned with a modern gymnosperm.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the few fossils that we can say shows the truth of the Darwinian evolution. Because it's called a transition fossil, where it both has the old and the new, the fern being the old.
It's the missing link.
Exactly. You got it.
So why did you feel the need to start with that tree? What was the point you were trying to get across?
Well, because without that true tree, to show how the importance of trees, you and I wouldn't be talking right now.
Right.
Because that tree took down sufficient amounts of carbon dioxide and added a sufficient amounts of oxygen, so you and me can do this, video.
Yep, exactly. Yeah,
and so you asked me, sometimes you get the idea that trees were the creators of civilization. Well, it's the creator of life on land. Because remember, like the Devonian period, up till the first true tree, Archaeopteryx, was totally in the water.
Right.
With the exception of extremely small, like insects on the land. Because you had to be able to for a large animal to metabolize requires a sufficient amount of oxygen.
Interesting. That's so cool.
You could say without the trees, you would have never had large terrestrial life, which evolved into us.
It's everything, right? Like when you start going down that rabbit hole, it just like it opens up more and more appreciation, right? I loved it. And also, I thought it was interesting because it was kind of a standalone chapter, whereas the rest of them kind of follow suit with different civilizations, right? You're kind of painting the picture of each civilization independently, whereas that one was kind of like just pure love, right? You're like, look at how awesome this is.
Well, it's actually the prelude to all large life.
Yeah, right.
It's what created a living planet.
It's wild. It's just wild to think about all of this.
Well, and also we have the example of what happens when we lose all trees, and that's part of the book too. The first chapter is in the end permanent extinction, where we almost lost all life on the planet. Both sea and land creatures. And the two primary causes were one, excess of carbon dioxide. The same phenomena happened naturally with the a huge chain of volcanoes that produced lava that burnt petroleum-based rocks. And the other portion of the agents for the end permanent extinction was deforestation, because without trees, herbivores no longer had food, right?
Mm-hmm.
And without the herbivores, the carnivores no longer had food.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just collapsed.
Yeah.
So that's so the example of Archaeopteryx, which created life, and then 130 million years later, the end permanent extinction almost ended life. Both a central player was the trees.
That's awesome. Yeah, I loved that beginning. It was it really managed to capture me and keep me engaged to keep going, right? I was like, this is going to be awesome. I love it. And then it was just like, hey, look at how much we screwed up.
Right.
Look at what we accomplished. All the cool things we did, how important wood was, but also aren't we stupid for making the same mistake over and over and over and over? Yeah, so I think we should dive into the importance of wood with building of civilization, right?
Let's go for it.
You painted the picture over and over again in the book, in different civilizations and the importance of it. Can you paint a picture for everybody? Just walk them through this situation so they can get an appreciation for it. Why is wood so important?
Well, first of all, as we already discussed, oxygen and carbon takedown.
Of course.
I mean, that's imperative for our survival.
Without atmosphere, what do we do? Yeah.
And then with the advent of Homo sapien, but actually also Neanderthal, we were able to make it from Africa all the way to the various, I don't know if we call it temperate. I'm not sure if I'd call Alberta temperate. I call it freezing. But,
yeah, it's not quite temperate.
I mean.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? The necessity of fire for a number of things. Wood fires, A, they kept us warm. B, we were able to eat a multitude of foods because they became available by cooking. 3, development of language, because for the first time people could congregate for hours together and say tell stories, and so language, developed.
That's an interesting point. I never thought about that. You're right, because otherwise they would have been spending a lot of time, just like keeping warm and trying to, foraging and trying not to die. Yeah.
Right. It wasn't
fire
a time,
helps with all that. Yeah.
Right. It wasn't a time for for rocking and rolling. Right.
Yeah.
Also, fire, allowed people to vanquish nighttime.
Right.
It also aided in hunting, because the first hunting was done with scaring the animals over a cliff, for example.
Right.
And it also protected us because animals are afraid of fire. So we were no longer victims of the night.
Makes sense. So probably populations start to flourish in that way too. Yeah, right.
Exactly. And communities start to begin. And also wood is being used, like I mentioned earlier, as the handles for tools.
Right.
The first tool sets and, farming.
Yeah, right. Agriculture. Absolutely.
And what's really interesting about the use of wood, I never thought of this until I did the book, is that a lot of Native American groups use fire to cut down a tree, right? They burn at the base until it would cause the tree to collapse. Or to hollow out a canoe. I mean, I have those illustrations in the book from the time period. Yeah. And what's interesting about fire too, and we can see the different evolutions in civilization, is the Asians who came over to North America came over before we had learned how to use fire to melt metals. So none of the civilizations in the Western Hemisphere had metallurgy.
Okay. Gotcha.
And so we see what happens when you don't know how to tame fire, wood fire, and making it into charcoal, because that knowledge was not there when all the First Nation people emigrated from Asia. So you see it as you see both the importance of wood in a negative way, and you see the importance of wood in a positive way. You see its use in most, quote, civilized, in all civilized groups, and you see what happens when a group comes over without that knowledge.
I like the use of the word quote, a quote of civilization. You're right. Civilized, like it's a good place to put the quotes. Yeah.
So, and this is an interesting statistic, is that we had 60% of the habitable earth was forested in 10,000 years ago. And
Crazy.
5,000, and we've lost a third of that, and 80% of that third happened as civilization began 5,000 years ago.
Yeah. It's funny because the book just brings out this real appreciation for wood and for trees and forests, but also just the folly of people, the lack of foresight, right? The lack of thinking ahead. And I think Well, I guess we should continue to tell the importance of wood first before we move into that portion. So let's keep going with the importance of wood as we move through the civilizational, the, I don't know what you call it, advancement in technology, I guess.
Right. Well, as I say in the book, wood is the unknown hero in the evolution from a stone and bone culture to today.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're talking about metallurgy, and it just seems like nothing happens without it.
And in fact, the famous writer Jack London, he wrote a whole volume on the Alaska experience.
Okay.
Basically, he basically concluded that a stone and bone culture always loses out to a metal culture.
Right. Just technology.
And we see that we see that everywhere. We saw that with Hernan Cortez, and we saw that in Alaska. I mean, it was the metal that allowed the Romans to beat out like the Gauls. It was the metal that allowed certain African tribes to defeat other African tribes who had just wood and stone. And that was one of the greatest sentences I've ever read. A stone and bone culture always gives way to a metal culture.
Yeah, it paints a picture, that's for sure.
and also a iron culture always whips a bronze culture.
Technology, it makes a big difference, right?
Yeah, and so if we think of the technologies, all the basic technologies would never have existed without wood.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone would think to tell the history of human civilization from the perspective of wood besides you. So I appreciate that you figured this out.
No, it was really, and then like I told you, when I went to like high class museums, like in Oxford, and they have all the accoutrements that were developed by fire, but they never showed the fire.
Right. Right.
And the material. But see, the Greeks understood that. That's why Prometheus was so punished by the gods, because he, with a wooden stick, he hit into the sun, and with that wooden stick came to humanity, who basically had no way of competing with animals just with their sheer, physicalness. But only with fire could they out-compete every animal on Earth. Yeah.
All thanks to wood. Talking about the importance of wood, and obviously, so wood was a highly sought-after commodity. It was something that every civilization was after, because the more wood you had, the more you could do, right? And the bigger wood you had, the bigger ships you could build, the bigger buildings you could build, the bigger church. The better technology you inevitably ended up having, the more metal you could make. And so inevitably, reading through the book, there's this repeated story of deforestation and the lack of forethought to sustainable wood supply, and just kind of, well, we'll just go over here and take that wood, and we'll go over here and take this wood. And inevitably it seemed to me that no one ever really learned. Like, there was even though there was histories then, there was still no one was learning, at least as a civilization, right? Maybe individuals knew, but the civilization itself, the society itself, never really figured it out. And it seems like the loss of access to wood could be attributed to ultimately the downfall of a civilization.
Well, there were actually three choices.
Right.
The first choice was downfall, which was, people didn't want that. So you had imperialism, colonization. Right. For example, when the Greeks were running out of wood, they looked towards Italy.
Okay.
And so, have you heard of Magna Graeca?
No, I have not.
That means Greater Greece. Greater Greece went all the way up to the border of Rome.
Oh, okay.
In fact, Theophrastus, who was a Greek botanist, you might say, in the 300s before the Common Area,
Mm-hmm.
he talked about Italy as if it were like the Pacific Northwest or like Alberta, like the woody areas of Canada.
Right.
And if you are in Italy today, you say, was this guy on acid or something?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But so the Greeks turned towards Sicily as their great, you might say, a wood basket.
Yeah. Do you think it's fair to say that that wars were fought over wood, and that if without the wood, the civilization couldn't sustain itself, right?
Oh God, you talk about, if you want to like have it really like shoved in your face, is the America relationship with the mother country, England, where,
Right.
as I show in the book, the English looked at the great white, and these don't exist anymore, the white pines of New England, this huge masting timber that could be used for these 280 gun, ships of the line.
Yeah, the huge ones. Yep.
As the colonists said, wow, we can use this wood for lumber, and we can sell this lumber on the market throughout the world, right? British said, this is, we need this timber for masting. And so you got these very restrictive laws from England onto the colonies to guarantee the continuation of masting timber. And so this created the first conflict because for some reason, basically, fuck you, this wood, we're going to use this wood. And this actually resulted in the first rebellions in the American colonies.
Right. Yeah.
So this is before the Tea Party. And so the first irreconcilable difference between the Americans and the British were in the woods.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, right? Though I know I had a gentleman on, John Pastor, talking. He wrote a book all about white pine, right? All about.
Oh wow. Okay.
This species and yeah, the white pine riots and how that was.
Oh great.
That was really.
Oh great. You know about that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's super.
I do. Yeah. Yeah. I recorded an episode with them. Actually, I think it was the first one I released this year, maybe last year, and. Yeah, it was the idea that the American Revolution really started with the white pine riots and really started with, access to wood and that, yeah, it just blew my mind, right? Another exclamation mark next to the importance of wood and civilization building, right?
Well, yeah, you're my man, because if you know about the white pine riots, then you know the story. And also developed the irreconcilable difference between the Native Americans and the Americans is that the Native Americans were basically a subsistence culture. So they required the woods, for their protein, right? Mm-hmm. And the Americans wanted the woods, as we said, to get money.
Yeah.
And also by building the mills, muddied up the waters where the Native Americans got their fish. Mm-hmm. So there was this irreconcilable differences all over wood. So it created so here you see how trees influence history because it created this brouhaha between the Americans and the English, which ended up, like you say, in the White Pine riots. And also another interesting story that I discovered for the new book was that Cornwallis would have survived had the British had access to the masts they formerly had in New England. But since they didn't have that access, the British fleet was in the West Indies. And so, you have lots of hurricanes. And so hurricanes destroyed a lot of the masting timber. And because they didn't have the American masting timber to replace the broken down masts, the rescue fleet couldn't come down and support Cornwallis, and the defeat of Cornwallis led to the surrender of the British and creation of America. And it was all like the famous, to paraphrase Richard III, where he says, my horse, a kingdom for a horse. The battle cry was, my mast, my kingdom for a mast.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. So, in large part, that the British were defeated. The American Revolution was won because of a lack of access to good timber.
so I think this is just a striking example of how important trees were, because it really determined, and that's what we're talking about now, determined the fate of nations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's that's one of the most recent examples that you have in the book. And there's example after example after example going back to, like you said, ancient Samaria and places in Africa and Greece and Rome. And it really hit home the point of the fact that you lose your access to wood and things aren't going to go well.
And also what it points out, and this I found very fascinating, is that movements in history that we hitherto didn't understand become very into our eyes once we consider the access to wood. Because the movement had always been westward, and it was following the wood. And so Macedonia, which mothered Alexander the Great, was a great wooded area. And the reason why it had so many riches was the Greeks in Athens had deforested or lost access to their areas of timber. And so they were totally dependent on the Macedonians. And so the Macedonians became very rich, and it was able to, once again, finance Alexander the Great. And then once the Romans took that part of the world, one of the iron laws was no Macedonian can touch their forests. Just like the British did, now that I think about it, just like the British did for America.
Right. It's a recipe for whoops. Yeah. And you talk about, we've been talking about the importance of civilization building and that kind of thing. But I also feel like as a forester, as my first real, responsibility as a professional is to the forest itself, to the sustainability of it, right? And that kind of thing. I'm very struck by the ecological and landscape consequences of civilization building and of, the deforestation that seems to almost inevitably come with it. And can you go into, maybe you have I know you for sure you do, but a couple examples that really stick out in your mind of landscapes that were changed, way back and are still changed today because of deforestation.
Oh my God!
And, human greed.
Okay. The most striking example is the Middle East.
Okay.
I mean, Israel, all those areas, the first story of deforestation comes out of the Middle East from Gilgamesh, if you recall.
Mesopotamia, right?
Mesopotamia, where the mountains above the Fertile Crescent were a paradise of huge timber.
Mm-hmm.
And if I didn't have the Epic of Gilgamesh talking about the intrusion into the great cedar forests, you would probably laugh in my face, because if you look at the mountains today, there's nary a single tree.
Right.
It's almost like we're talking about two different worlds, right?
Right. Like it doesn't even make sense that there was a place like that was once forested heavily with huge cedars and everything else, and now what does it look like now in comparison? Like I've never been, I can't say. You just
Actually, if you read the Old Testament, they compare like a fallen king as a cedar, that's been felled in the woods. So you had this a forested mentality, and if you go to those areas, you wouldn't believe. Also, what really blew me out when I was doing the new edition, and a lot of this is from the new edition, is elephants. Thousands and thousands of elephants roam the Middle East.
Really? Huh.
And there's not a single elephant today. And also in the various monuments of that period, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, the rulers bragged about killing this amount of elephants or that amount of elephants. So you might say, oh, well, these guys are exaggerating. But in the latest archaeological finds, they're finding ancient elephant bones in places like Syria.
Yeah,
Who would think Syria was full of like Africa? Yep.
Yeah. So places we know today as desertified places that are more or less sterile in a lot of ways were once fertile areas because of forests, and they were. We can point to the fact that they were made that way. Most likely from deforestation.
Most
from
likely
human civilization.
they were. We know. Well, what happened, for example, in Mesopotamia, and this is another example, is the forests protected the mountains from erosion.
Mm.
And once they cut down the cedar forests and you had wood in the rivers, and followed by wood in the rivers was highly great amount of salinization because the rocks were the sedimentary rocks were high in salts.
Okay.
And that eventually depleted the soil because you can't grow crops very well in a salt marsh.
Salt's not good for plants, huh? I didn't know.
Yeah, right. And you take, like, in the Bible, for example, they have examples of what happens when a civilization falls. Because in Isaiah, he puts himself as an oak, and he's so happy that Sargon the Great, who is the ruler of that area, had died. Because he said, no longer will people come and cut me down.
Huh. It's wild it goes back that far, right? This evidence of deforestation. And I just keep coming back to the idea of the human folly of it all, right? Like the need you need to fuel your home, you need to feed your family, you need these basic things, and technology is good, but the continued misunderstanding and the folly of lack of sustainable resources, right? And just the fact that nobody thought, hey, what happens when you run out of trees is just blows my mind.
Because they always thought you could move somewhere else.
Let's just pillage and move on, and we'll find it elsewhere. Yeah. And for a large part they did, obviously, for, lots of those civilizations lasted a long time.
Well, you take, for example, North Africa. I mean, you would never think of North Africa as the Pacific Northwest of Europe, right?
No.
And that was where the Romans got most of their wood for heating their baths, for example, in Rome.
Crazy.
And what that did was it accentuated desertification.
Right.
And so you always had a desert like a Sahara, but not so expansive.
Right. Just expand. Yeah, that's wild.
We are all descendants of forest people.
Mm.
And the only reason we don't imagine that is because they're no longer trees.
Mm-hmm.
But, for example, the Romans, as the population grew, as the hubris, to be a great power grew, they needed the trees. For example, to fight the indigenous people of Belgium and France, what Caesar did was he cut a swath 5 or 6 miles wide of forest so the legions could not be ambushed.
5 or 6 miles wide.
Yeah.
Woo. Imagine that. Just left
well,
alone.
Actually, the Roman roads, Roman is famous for its roads, right?
Right.
Well, underneath the road itself, they placed wooden planks. So it wouldn't sag.
Right.
In fact, in North America too, United States, the roads that led from, say, the East Coast to the Ohio were all made out of planks.
Wow. Isn't that crazy?
And so all the roads, what do they say? All roads lead to Rome.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And just think of all the buildings. The Roman buildings, they required wood because to get lime from limestone requires heat.
Okay. Oh, right. So wood.
The wood.
Yeah.
So
wood once again.
Okay, or just think of all the containers to say place olive oil, or to place whatever products, because they didn't have like boxes, right?
Mm-hmm.
They all had to be made out of ceramic, and ceramic cannot exist without firing the earth.
It all comes back to trees in the end.
In fact, for example, have you ever been to Cyprus?
No, I haven't been to Cyprus. No.
Well, I would tell someone who doesn't know the history that was once the great wooded island of the Eastern Mediterranean. You think you'd have me committed. And that's what and all that wood went to create the copper, from the copper ore.
Yes.
And Cyprus comes from the Greek word copper. People don't understand that even thousands of years ago, there was so much industry going on that great clouds of smoke covered these regions as they, worked the metals.
Wow.
And in fact, this happened in Africa too, where as you learned how to produce iron, you changed all your implements, and that began changing the topography also, because you could cut down more trees to clear more land, to feed more people, and make more money. The whole
economy.
The whole economy is based on wood.
Yeah. It's funny because it's kind of this double-edged sword, right? Where you go, there's more human beings on the planet than have ever existed. Like that's got to mean something for, I like people. I think people are good inherently. Maybe as a mob, we need to work on our etiquette when it comes to dealing with the world and our relationship to it. But and we have, by all accounts, by any way you can measure it, if you had to pick a time in history to be alive, today would be the time, right? And it's the most likelihood of living a good, prosperous life. And it's all, you can bring it all back to the use of wood, right? But we're also in this situation where economy has driven us to a point where we've forgotten, as every civilization seems to have forgotten, right? We've kind of forgotten what's really important, right? And we're obsessed with this idea of progress and moving forward. And it's interesting to see the similarities between ancient civilizations and our civilization. And although I think our civilization is different in a lot of ways, and that we're starting to see more of the sustainable ideas come to fruition and actually be societal values, the danger still seems to be there.
Well, because the problem is, everybody is acquisitive. You want to make more money than the other person.
Right. It's this battle, right?
As an example, we have a channel that's devoted to stocks and bonds. The commentator there was complaining that we don't have enough sawmills to cut more trees to, build more houses. And in the last part of my book, what I show is that our survival is actually dependent on the forest, as it all began with Archaeopteryx. Because the last 30 years, we've really learned a lot about how valuable trees are. Because what we've learned is that, one, trees create rain. Because earlier we thought that all the rain came from was evaporation of oceans. Water.
Right.
But what the new discoveries are that at least 40% of the rain comes from evotranspiration.
Right.
And then also, even with the ocean producing, if it did produce 100% of the precipitation, if 500 miles inland was all like desert, there would be no. The trees act as a relay.
Yes.
For example, the Belgian Congo, the rainforests in the Belgian Congo provide the precipitation that ends up in the Nile.
Yes, right. all because of without the forest, that precipitation doesn't exist. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I was, with that in mind, you had a line in the last chapter of the book talking about exactly that, how, the evapotranspiration is a large part of what mitigates, climate change at a faster pace and actually keeps the world cool in a large way. And there was an interesting line that you attributed to I think it was a journalist maybe, and you said the smell of pines.
Exactly. I was just gonna you just took that out of my head.
Okay. You do it. I forget. I don't even remember how it went. You say it.
The smell of forest pine can limit climate change.
Yeah, like that line alone speaks volumes, right? To the importance of forests and the need for that those ecosystems to exist in perpetuity, right? Like it's huge. We spent all this time in this book talking about wood, right? Talking about the importance of wood. And then the last chapter you really break down the importance of forests. Right. And it kind of brings it all home, and you realize that, like, yes, societies need wood, including ours. However, societies also need forests, and we're in a place where I think as societies, we're starting to realize that, and we're starting to figure out how do we balance this equation. And the ultimate thing we're fighting against is the idea of infinite growth of economy, right? Like, we have to come to a realization that the infinite growth model does not work when there's limited supply, limited resources.
Well, there you go. Like people earlier thought that you could always go to another forested area.
Right.
But once all the forests are gone, there's no place to go.
Yeah, you're screwed.
Even in the earliest times, like for example, when the Bible was written, the first demand by God to Adam is protect the forests. In fact, I know this because I know it in Hebrew because I spent 3 years in Israel, and I know I read it in Hebrew, and it's shomer ha'esim, which means almost like militarily protect the trees.
Oh, interesting. Wow, that's fascinating. Like, and that's the thing that I get so confused about, because you bring up these examples in the histories of high-ranking people who go, "Hey, hold up, we might be going at this a little quick. What happens when we run out? We need to start planting," and nobody listens to them. It seems like, right? And obviously in the Bible, even there's the importance of the necessity of forests in the beginning.
Beharashit, which means in the beginning.
Yeah. So the importance of forests and the importance of ecology has always been there, but our anthropocentric view, our weird ideas about what progress can be or should be, we just kind of seem to forget and go, well, it's fine. It'll be there. It'll take care of itself.
Well, no, the problem is hubris and acquisitiveness is, like I mentioned earlier, where a investment program was saying the problem is we don't have enough sawmills.
Right.
And also the ability to sort of charm ourselves by, like, for example, with the forest industry, calling trees a renewable resource. But they only become renewable if we let the old growth grow. Because the scientific evidence is that if you treat trees like a crop, you lose that carbon dioxide sequestration capability. But a forest, old growth, is sort of like a bank, right? Oh, this is great! I never thought of this. This is cool. So thinking of trees as a crop is like a credit card, and allowing a tree to continue its growth is like an investment.
Absolutely.
So one is like getting in debt.
Yeah.
And the other is making an investment in our planet.
Absolutely. No, there's absolutely, it's I, without a doubt, that's true, right? Like sustainability, the idea of sustainable resource in the forest industry is one that it's been moving forward as at decade after decade, it changes and includes more values. And I think it's only in the last 3 decades, kind of like you said, that not only have we been forcing replanting, but we're starting to include other values that we hadn't considered before, like biodiversity, like water storage, like traditional values, recreational values, and all these things. And it's carbon included, right?
Yeah, well, here's the thing, is that for the longest time, the idea of biodiversity and is considered kind of a fuzzy thinking environmental guy, while the trees act like a social distancer from many of the worst diseases possible. Lyme disease is caused by fragmenting the forest. Because what it does
part of the book.
is it allows the generalized species like a mouse, for example, to survive, because the predators are more specialized and they're dependent on the trees, on the forest, and they keep down those generalized species. They cull them tremendously. When you get rid of the forest, you get rid of the predator, and you have a plethora of these reservoirs for the tick larvae. And so then we get a terrible disease, and then we have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to somehow eradicate it, but we still have tremendous amount of suffering.
Yeah.
Another example is in Ebola. You can actually calculate where Ebola will break out is where the old growth is removed.
Really? Okay. How so?
Well, because
what's that connection?
Oh, the connection is several points. One, these diseases tend to spread as the roads, grow to the forest.
Okay.
And then you bring, with the timber, you bring these diseases to larger and larger population areas.
Okay.
It's sort of like HIV was a perfect example of that, where it was sequestered for hundreds and hundreds of years in remote areas. Once you build the roads into the forest, it's the end. This began with Gilgamesh 5,350 years ago. He was like exemplified. Gilgamesh built a road to the forest, right? And then there's no forest.
Right.
And here we have also what we have too. And also you take malaria is another example in South America, where you start where the mosquito population that carries the malaria disease is kept down by the predators in the forest. Once you remove those forests, it goes out into the population, and also you bring in people who then take out these diseases, and then you have a epidemic or pandemic. In fact, one of the real eye-openers when I was working on the new edition was I found in a very prestigious journal in 2018 article called Bats, Deforestation, and Coronavirus.
Yeah.
How's that for an eye-opener? And because what happens, once again, when you cut down the forest, all the predators die, and the bats, which are a generalized species, flourish, especially in farming areas where you have lights that attract insects that feed the bats.
Yeah. In and of itself, that last chapter was worth reading the whole book, because
Thank you.
It painted a lot of great pictures of points I didn't think about, right? About the importance of forests and that kind of thing. And it really, it brings home the ideas of the importance of finding a balance between the use of wood and this is, making sure that we have forests, and not just, and I don't mean, when I say forest, I don't mean plantations either, right? Like, right. a plantation, a wood plantation has its uses, right? I don't have a problem with them per se, but it's not a forest in the traditional sense in that it holds the values of everything else.
I would
right?
say a plantation has its value if you're doing it in formerly degraded agricultural land. But if you...
Right. No, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I agree. You can't, I would never, to me, forest management happens from a place of you harvest and you replant what was there and you help that along to make sure it gets back to a state that it was at, and you let it be a forest with all of its values, with all of the biodiversity, with all of the everything it had, not a plantation. Where the plantation, to me, like you said, that's something that we can maybe help feed our society with wood without degrading the value that exists in the forest, right? We can help supplement our need for consumption with that. So I think it plays a huge role for sure. But I agree. To me, this book was a lot about like, it's funny. As a forester, I find a need to always differentiate the idea between deforestation and forestry, right? In the modern day, obviously, through reading your book, forestry was deforestation for thousands of years. So I find the need to differentiate, right? And I mean, there's obviously varying degrees of what people consider to be sustainable, and I'm always of the thought that I want to see society progress to a point where sustainable forest management means exactly that. We include all the values, right? The carbon storage, the biodiversity, the water storage. We include traditional values like berry picking and grass, basket weaving and all those types of things into forest management decisions, right? And so it's not just, and there's lots of cool places doing this. And so I loved the book from the perspective of kind of a cautionary tale of, hey, we need wood, but we need forests just as much, or maybe more, right? So, and in a society where we're still caught up in the idea of the rat race, right? It's an important message, I think.
But also an important message, too, is, for example, in Gabon, for example, which has a very good environmental record, is to pay people for doing nothing. In other words, pay people for sustaining a catchment area that is greatly valued. In fact, that's happening in you take New York City.
Okay.
New York City, for example, had a choice between building a water filtration plants that would cost $9 billion, or buying the I guess it's called the rights to the watershed for $1 billion. And I think Seattle and Portland have done the same.
It's a no-brainer, right? Like you can have, especially when you start to think about all the other values that includes, right? Like by saving a forest, you're not just protecting the water, you're protecting all kinds of other values at the same time, right? And the forest will do some of that work for you.
One of the things that really fascinated me was how the forests, say, in what's called the neotropics, which is like Central America, are like the wintering for the birds that come all the way to Canada.
Right, yes.
Did you know, I mean, I did not know this. This blew me out, that a hummingbird usually travels in a year at least 4,000 or 5,000 miles.
It's ridiculous. I remember I did a recording with the Boreal Center for Bird Conservation near where I grew up in Slave Lake, and they said they had a tracker, or not a tracker, but they had a band on, I think it was a warbler of some sort, and from the places that that bird was identified, like it was caught again, right? So someone could band it. They caught it, physically had it in their hands, wrote down the band number, and put it into the database, right? In a matter of like 3 years, it had traveled, I think it was 1.5 times the circumference of the Earth. It was like 60,000 kilometers. This little warbler had traveled in like 2 years, and it's insane what they can do. And they're just covering the globe.
And then we ask ourselves, well, why do we need birds? And for example, under Mao Zedong, they killed all the birds because Mao Zedong thought the birds eat all the grains. And what Mao Zedong didn't understand was the birds eat all the pestilence that destroys the crops. And so about 60 million people died because of that.
Because of a lack of understanding.
Biodiversity is not some hippie idea.
No.
Another example is in the American Eastern Forest. They thought that the acid rain was killing the trees. But what happened was it was killing the salamanders who fertilized the soil for the trees.
Oh.
So it's this whole idea of the earth as a very finely tuned system. And when you remove, say, two chords from a guitar, you don't have very nice music. And the same thing is when you start playing around with the ecology of the forest.
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you, with this second publishing, so you first published this book, or this is the third publishing, I think, right?
Right. Actually the fourth. All the other editions were basically the original book.
Right. And this one's you added to it and you changed it a bit.
Well, because I'm just a very insane, crazy person, I continued to collect all the ideas that were accumulating, both historically and, like, for example, Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx happened a year after the original book was published.
I see.
So I was accumulating in my godforsaken house all this information. And what happened was, and this is my whole life is based on serendipity. In 2018, a local newspaper in Santa Barbara announced a symposium I was putting on for the university on the woman who discovered that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas in 1856. And so they announced that, and Patagonia, being only like 25 miles away, read that. And they said, God, we wanted to do a forest journey for a decade. So suddenly the wheels started to churn, right? And suddenly you might say my fetish or whatever you want to call it, or my craziness, I got to, suddenly, use all this new information that I'd been accumulating for a new book.
Beautiful.
And then also, remember, the internet didn't really exist in 1989. And so to have access to the internet was like a plethora of new information. And also, as a forester, you realize that so much has evolved since 1990 in the field, right?
A lot has changed. A lot has changed.
Tremendous change where you see like departments. I experienced this when I did lectures, for example, that the forestry departments were changing from just a cut them down approach to a biological approach.
Yeah, there's a movement towards ecological forestry is the term that's coming out, right? Trying to include all of the values in the system before making a decision of whether or not harvesting is the right decision for society at that time, including climate change and all that thing. And that's why I wanted to ask you this question. So I wanted to ask you about the difference in the past 30 years, 33 years, 34 years since you've published the original one and this new version coming out. How do you perceive the societal headspace of today versus back then? And also when you compare that to ancient civilizations, where do you feel like we are in the spectrum of understanding the balance between, consumerism and the need for natural spaces and for forests?
Well, actually in Hebrew, there's a saying from Ecclesiastes, Ein mashiach chadash b'tok hashemesh, which means there's nothing new under the sun.
Okay. Yeah.
And in a certain sense, we've always had these voices all the way back to Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh's companion, who participated in killing the guardian of the forest, as they were coming down the river on a raft of timber, he has second thoughts. He says, I think we've turned the forest into a wasteland. What will we tell our gods? And so you had this notion of environmentalism implanted, like with Plato, as I also told you earlier, and in other people too. And you could see it too as, for example, I would say in the 19th century with the industrialization of forestry, it was just cut them down.
Yeah.
Sticking dynamite in the hollow of a trunk of a giant sequoia, and then making the debris into grape stakes.
Yeah, it was seen as this is never going to end. We don't have to worry about it. It's just keep going. We've got infinite amounts of forest. Yeah, it was
it was in the 1990s. In fact, it was a 1990 paper by Jerry Franklin,
right,
where he was the one who he was with the U.S. Forest Service, developed the biological examination with the spotted owl.
Right, of course.
And so this created the Great War in the American, forests. And I saw this personally because I was invited to give a lecture at the School of Forestry at Oregon State University, because you had the old chainsaw guys who were like 50%, and then you had the biological younger people who wrote a paper that it is better to allow a forest after a fire to regenerate itself rather than bring machinery in to, quote, salvage the timber.
Sure.
So this created a great schism, and they brought me in to be the therapist. Because
are you qualified for that?
yeah, as a professor of history of forestry, yes.
Yeah.
And so I saw this, like, the whole change of both the feminization. There were lots of women in the new school,
right,
and all the older guys were these burly guys who who just say, cut them down.
Classic lumberjack, right?
Yeah, classical lumberjacks. And so the new forestry showed there was this whole idea of anthropomorphizing a tree, believing that as the tree grew older, it grew feebler. But the work of Jerry Franklin and Mark Harmon showed that actually as a tree grew older, it actually absorbed more carbon than a younger tree. There was this whole notion that if the younger trees are like just grabbing the carbon out of the atmosphere, and the old tree is just sort of like an old age home, right, in a wheelchair. And they were the ones who were the first people to scientifically show the value of old growth.
Right.
And so,
absolutely.
So here we have the beginnings of what we call the new forestry, where you, just as you said earlier, we introduce all the values of the forest, both for building material, but also for sequestering carbon, for wildlife. All these other values are included, and we don't look at trees as a crop. We look at it as a environmental mechanism that is life itself.
Absolutely.
One of the things that really fascinated me was in 1994, it was introduced the idea that the roots do most of the carbon sequestration by creating carbonates, and those carbonates get all the way down to the oceans, where they become like locked in as limestone. But also to show you how the web of life goes, is the carbonates also, calcium carbonate, helps sea animals, mollusks, and gastropods form their shells.
Oh, that's cool.
This whole
That's
web
cool
of
connection.
life, this whole web of life is the way a new forester looks at things. And
how are trees connected to? How are trees connected to the forming of seashells?
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, probably so much I learned in the last 4 or 5 years writing the new part of the book. So this whole idea of this system that's all working together to create this heaven on earth. Yeah. And that's how the ancients looked at the forest too, is where actually the early ideas was God lived in the forest.
Yes, right.
Like in Genesis, for example, the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. And also in Sumerian, the gods lived in the forest because the forests were so cool, especially when you're looking at it from a Middle Eastern perspective, where down below it's like horribly hot.
Right.
And also the rivers they saw as a creation of the trees.
Yes.
And somehow we got out of that, but now we're coming back to that notion that the earth is a living system. And if you tweak one part of it, you tweak other parts of it.
Yeah. And it's all a balancing act.
Yes. Yeah, so I hope, and I think I succeeded from what you're saying is in the last chapter, I brought that out.
Absolutely. No, you absolutely did. I will say that the vast majority of the book, all the civilizational talk is very depressing. Cause it's a lot of look at how it starts off good. You're like, look at how important wood is. Look at how incredible of a resource wood is. This is how every chapter starts. Wood's awesome. Look at this. This is crazy. And then look what happened when we got greedy and shit went south. And it was just this like,
but also what really surprised me, because when I started doing a forest journey, my whole mind was totally open.
Right. Okay.
Was the influence, like we talked about, as an example, the British experience.
Yeah.
Of how history is moved by the trees.
Right. Absolutely. Big time.
And so it might be depressing, but maybe it's the depression that we say, okay, I need an antidepressant, right? And the antidepressant is the new forestry.
Right.
Which we realize that our existential survival is with the trees. In fact, trees are more important for our existence than they are for like making a boat, for example.
That's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense. And I think, how do you feel? It sounds like you do. It sounds like you feel like the societal headspace, like our values and how we weight our values are changing. Do you feel optimistic in that sense? Do you feel like society's starting to value, that wholesome idea of sustainability in a true sense over the idea of, profit margins and that kind of thing?
Well, what I tried to, and this was based on fact.
Yeah, right.
That we're all humans, and that no matter whether we were a North American, First Nation person,
right?
We all are culpable.
Absolutely,
because, for example, and this at first brought me into hot water with some people, is that you had the New England, the Algonquin, for example, the Algonquins, they every 4 or 5 years they had to move because they'd used that much wood, and they had to continually move on. So I just tried to show what it was, right?
I see.
I wasn't trying to paint a rosy picture. I wasn't trying to paint a depressive picture. I was like looking scientifically at what happened in the world, and to bring to a realization that the forests are more important today than they ever were. And so therefore, we have to be like Enkidu and get this understanding that we've turned a lot of the world into a wasteland, which we can't deny that. And what will, posterity think of what we've done? So we better do a better, job. So I think that was the ending of the book.
Yeah. Yeah. And I found myself asking the question of, I think, like changing hearts. I think it's easy to tell people that I think people follow you, right? They go, hey, forests are important. Yeah, we need to do that. Environment is important. Yeah, totally with you. And people will even join the cause and they'll rah or whatever, right? But I think the actions speak louder than words, right?
Oh,
and that we're all
now you're really striking a chord. Like, people have thought, God, this John Perlin's a really weird guy because he doesn't own a car, right? And he rides his bicycle everywhere.
I can tell by the background of what we're looking at here. I can see what you got. I was like, oh, this guy lives the green lifestyle, and I don't. I can honestly say that I don't live that life. Part of it is being in Canada, in Edmonton, in one of the coldest cities in the world. It's tough to do some of these things, and our cities aren't designed that way. But it's and I'm part of that issue as well. I'll fully admit it, right? And so that was kind of my question, right? Was I think people's hearts can get there, but to practically get them to the place where their actions are saying the same thing that their heart is saying is a difficult jump to make. And I think that's kind of the hurdle in my mind. Do you think that's the hurdle we're at now?
Precisely. I mean, it's been very funny. Especially in California, right? To just have a bike,
Yeah.
But actually it's really kept me in shape.
Yeah. It's funny. I would have thought that California would be the perfect place to just have a bike. Like it's the same temperature all year round. What's the problem?
Well, it's not the same temperature for us. Okay. But because we're wimps, it's been really, really cold. It's it gets down to about 5 degrees Celsius at night.
Okay. Yeah. That's perfect biking weather. That's perfect. I can wear a t-shirt and I won't even sweat. It's nice. It's perfect.
Well, what the Norwegians do? They put spikes through their tires so they don't slide in the ice.
Yeah, we have that here. Here. Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah. We also have the fat tire bikes now, but our cities aren't designed for that kind of mobility. Like, especially in Canada, our cities are designed with a local industry centered housing on the outskirts, and everything is accessed through roads, right? And so it's challenging. And also we have the issue of, minus 30 degrees Celsius temperature. Teslas don't do well in that temperature.
Also, I'm very lucky in where I live because I'm like, 6 city blocks from a wild area and about 4 blocks from a good shopping area. Mm-hmm. And you asked earlier about my relationship to trees.
Yeah.
And after this, broadcast, I'm going to go out and bask in we have this wild area of oak forest.
Oh, nice.
And also we have the special oak that no one else has. It's the perennial oak, the oak that isn't deciduous.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
It's always green.
Wow, that's cool. I didn't know that. Was a thing.
It's called the Pacific live oak.
Oh, okay. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, or in Spanish, it's called the encino.
Oh, okay, I've heard that word. Yeah. Yeah. My intentions with bringing you on was to bring this appreciation. I think it was to follow in your footsteps, right? And to bring this appreciation for wood and the use of wood and the importance of wood. And then also bring home the point of, but be careful, because People have lost track of what's important in the past and forgotten that forests are necessary and needed. And we're in a place now with climate change and the use of fossil fuels and coal and everything else where forests are needed more than ever. And the need for sustainable forest management in the truest sense is at an all-time high.
Well,
Yeah.
also, I would like to add that you've really got me going. Is a person gave me in the last pages of the book of the history part. You have a picture of a woman, and in the background where she's sitting are all these logs.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And so a relative of hers asked, "Well, where did these logs come from?" Because they were both from Minnesota, and Minnesota now is basically treeless.
Okay.
And this was a scene from Minnesota.
Yeah, and just no one knows. You don't realize the impact, right?
Just like we talked about the trees in Mesopotamia.
Changed landscapes, moved whole landscapes. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it's all different. Well, even you mentioned that United Kingdom obviously has had societies there for thousands or whatever, quite a while. I would say probably a couple thousand years, 3,000. What is it? I don't know how long, but whatever. Doesn't matter. Been there a long time. But it wasn't until the last 500 years that you showed that they really went to town on deforestation and really put a number on the landscape to the point where it is what it is today, which is not what it historically was.
Well, okay. So here's I actually worked in the UK, but this was before I got into the forest book, and when I realized the area, the agricultural area, there was not a single tree in the landscape. And then when I began a forest journey to realize that this was the home to the, formerly it was called the Weld, which meant the wilderness. And there wasn't a single tree in the landscape.
Just farmland. Yeah.
Just farmland.
It's crazy what people can do when they put their minds to it, right? And we've changed entire landscapes. We've changed the world with our ingenuity and innovativeness. And yeah, we're only now recognizing, or I shouldn't say recognize, we're only now starting to take action on those ideas of sustainability, it seems.
And that's interesting. You should bring up England because now they've preserved certain of the ancient trees. And now they're trying to reproduce this in genetic engineering to replant. Or you take Ireland. I mean, Ireland, there's not a single tree, right? It's all grass.
Right.
And at one time, this was the lumber yard for England.
Isn't that crazy? Like, it's important for us to think on that, right? And how easy it is for us to get carried away. And the things that are lost in that pursuit of...
Well, now that I think about it, forest journey is like, tries to bring us back to see what we have done so we don't have to do it again.
Exactly. That was my thought. That was exactly my thought. I was like, what do you think it would take for us? I wasn't sure if I was going to get to this, but I'm going to ask it to you because you brought it up. Considering that I think we both agree that society seems to be moving into this space of balance, right? The space of understanding all the values and bringing them all into consideration. What would it take for us to put aside all that and just continue as the ancients did and deforest and not worry about it and deal with it later? What do you think? Do you think we're do you think it's something that's possible today, or do you think that society's far enough along that we wouldn't allow that travesty to happen?
Well, I don't know how Canada is, but I do know that in America right now, with all the craziness, of the Trump, and all these
totally reasonable guy.
All these. Like Ronald Reagan said, he said, if you saw one tree, you've seen them all.
Yeah, right.
And that was his evaluation of the redwoods.
Yeah, right.
So, hopefully a forest journey will become like, and that's one of the things I hope, maybe it'll become like a school book. So
that'd be cool.
So we can see what we have done and we can see how dependent we are for our survival, and so we can start being more balanced.
You know what you need to do? You got to make a kid's book now. You got to make an abbreviated version of A Forest Journey that's like 50 pages that brings in the lessons so that, you know, a 10-year-old can read it and follow along and get the ideas. That's your next project. There you go.
Well, you got me. Let me recover. Let me recover from. I mean, you just seemed like people thought I was totally like crazy, like because I really focused when I got this opportunity from Patagonia. I mean, and with Patagonia, they were even pissed at me because I would give them one iteration, then I'd discover something else.
Oh, you wanted more?
more and more and more. They would say, no, we can't have a book that big, you know. And then what was really funny, and this is really the irony, and this happens to me many times, I met with the publishing people at Patagonia, and they said, we know you're going to laugh at us, right? But we want to give you another half year to add more material.
That's awesome. Obviously, you're doing a good job, right? Thank you. Yeah, this is incredible, John. Like I think it's an important story that you tried to tell here, and I think you did an excellent job of detailing and keeping to the ideas of history and really following our ideas and making it hard to deny that, hey, there's danger here, and also appreciation and love to be had as well, right? And it's it was a great book, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to read it and to talk to you and to break everything down, and I think people are really going to enjoy it.
Well, thank you for having me. I mean, this was a lot of fun.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. This is great.
Oh yeah. Now I have to do a little bit of bicycling to recover from all this talking. Right?
That's how I always feel too. I'm always like, okay, now I have to go on with like life now. I'll be thinking about this for the next 2 days.
Okay.
Man, wasn't that a doozy? I never really, like, whenever I dive into history, I always think, this might be kind of boring. Like, I want to know what's up next. But that was awesome. Like, all those weird facts and interesting ideas from the past, and you know, the cautionary tale of how societies kind of repeat their same mistakes over and over and over again, and making sure that we don't do the same thing, right? Yeah. So thanks a lot for listening. I hope you liked that. I know I really enjoyed it. Thank you, John, for all that you do, and for Patagonia for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation. And we'll catch you next time. Take it easy.